Cabbage is the one that surpasses all other vegetables. It can be eaten both cooked and raw. Cato the Elder. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. If you're a newcomer, welcome in. I hope you will enjoy and will decide to peruse our backlog of episodes. And for all my returning listeners, thank you guys. As always, your continued support means a lot. Please be sure to like, rate 5 stars, download, sub, all that kind of good stuff on whatever platform you choose to listen to me on. Just do what you can to help continue the show growing. So this week we are in part 2 of our domestication episodes for the years between 4 and 2000 BCE, whichever of those you prefer. And I think what we're going to cover today, as you may guess, I guess, from my introductory quote, we are going to be talking about cabbage, although technically speaking, it's not actually cabbage. It is the Brassica family of plants, which actually includes quite a lot. And then we'll also be covering the nightshades, or at least several of the nightshades, potatoes, eggplants, that kind of thing. And there may be one or two other plants. We'll just see how we are on time. Before that, though, I did have someone ask me. I mentioned I didn't think South Carolina would be a particularly good area for growing peppers. And someone asked me why, considering, those type of chilies grow very well in other kind of hot environments. And, that is true. And I kind of misspoke. Apparently, and this is something that surprised me, and I don't know how true it is, or if this is just, kind of like an old wives' tale, but apparently the best time for growing peppers is not when it's very hot. Which is odd. You think, a lot of these really hot peppers come from areas that are very, tropical or subtropical. I would think, hot weather helps them grow. Actually, you don't want it to be too hot during the growing season. So typically, I guess those peppers are grown like at a little bit cooler time of the year. Whereas in South Carolina particularly, when it's when it's cool here, it's typically, I guess, too cool for good peppers to grow. And when it comes time to grow them, it gets hot fast. Also, I don't think our soil is particularly suited. I wouldn't think so, but hey, what do I know? I don't grow peppers. It surprised me. So it's not actually a matter of temperature. It's more of a matter of when it's hot and cold and how long kind of that intermediate kind of just spring-like temperature lasts. So, of course, I could also just be wrong. The information I was reading just said that, really hot peppers don't grow really well in hot temperature. They need to grow in a period of time where it's still like, mild, I guess. But that could be wrong. That's just what I was reading. So again, I'm not a pepper grower, so just my guess. And again, the fact that the hottest ones are grown here shows how much that might be true. Although perhaps Ed Curry knows something that the rest of us don't. But again, that was just my kind of assumption and surprise. Now then, let us turn to the primary topic for this week's episode, or at least one of the primary topics, and that is the Brassica group of plants, or I guess it's a genus of plants, technically. These are also sometimes known as cruciferous vegetables. Sometimes they're just grouped together as cabbages. Again, sometimes they are referred to as mustard plants, depending on where you are. But this includes a very wide variety of species. Bok choy, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, rutabaga, which are also sometimes referred to as Swedes, collard greens, mustard, as I mentioned, and that's like the seeds used to make the yellow condiment, kale, belongs in this, cauliflower, all this kind of stuff, all belong to the the Brassica family or genus of crops. Now, Brassica is the Latin word for cabbage. It's what the Romans used to describe the plant, though its origins are kind of hard to determine. There is some who think it might be an evolution of the Latin phrase prescara, which would be to cut something off early, and that's kind of in reference to them harvesting the leaves, right before winter. Of the plant, and you leave the rest of the plant in the ground, and then you just kind of harvest the leafy greens to eat. Another theory is that it's actually a Celtic loan word, and that the original Celtic word may have come from their something like Bressic or Bressic, and then that entered into Latin. Though again, this is all debated. No one knows for sure. Now, again, this covers a very wide variety of plants, and this includes both domesticated strains, wild strains, and hybrids of the two. And each of these may have subspecies. So, for one prime example, the first one we're going to be looking at is Brassica Rapa, which is also known as oleifera, and this includes a couple different things. Turnips, rape seed will come from this. A lot of different plants kind of have there's a lot of different subspecies of the Brassica Rapa. Some of these developed based on, selective breeding, looking for specific parts of the plant that are more useful to the people growing it than others. In some cases, you might want the root vegetable. That gives you the turnip, the bok choy. Then there's some that, that the leaves are more important. That gets us cabbages, things like that. In some cases, the seeds might be more important. So that is also part of the way that these subspecies developed out of the original Brassica Rapa. Now, there are also cases where the plant is being mixed in with other semi-domesticated or domesticated members of the Brassica family, and we'll get into that as well. But it looks like Brassica Rapa is the first of these Brassica family or genus to be domesticated. At least that's what the current genetic research shows. And the paper that I used to actually kind of read about this, or at least the primary paper, it's written by Alex C. McAlvey et al. It appeared in the Oxford Journals for Molecular Biology and Evolution, and it's dated to April 30th, 2021. I'm going to be including this in the episode description, or the link to it, and this is entitled Brassica Rapa, Domestication, Untangling Wild and Feral Forms, and Convergence of Crop Morphotypes. And I do recommend, you reading through it if you have the time and the inclination. But to kind of just help summarize it fairly quickly, basically they did a very broad selection and sampling of crops related to Brassica Rapa, as well as other Brassica genus, and they did genetic testing on them, and this allowed them to identify feral and wild relatives, or potentially wild relatives, maybe relatives that had been domesticated and then became wild later, as well as a reasonable center of domestication, and it kind of helped them get a rough reconstruction on how the crop eventually morphed and diversified over time. Apologies for that phone alert there. But essentially, it looks like the earlier part or the earliest period that this domestication event would have happened would have been in Central Asia, right around 4000 BC, maybe give or take, 100 years. Um, and that's not the only domestication event. It continues to be developed in what is now Central Asia. Well, it was always Central Asia, but what we now refer to as Central Asia, kind of in the mountains. And then various subspecies of the Rapa will spread out in different directions at different times. Again, depending on if people are more interested in the leafy vegetable or the vegetable used for creating oil seeds, or if you're looking for the root of the vegetable, like a turnip. Various strains or subspecies of the rapa are leaving Central Asia from about, again, 4,000 to as late as about 1500 BC, BCE. And these don't all go to the same area. They go in different directions. Some places only, go into Europe. Some go into, a little further south into the Middle East, or Middle East and India, or some go just into Eastern Asia and Europe, and vice versa. So there's a lot of different varieties of the rapa just being sent and dispersed out of its original domestication site. But again, there are other varieties of Brassica that are being domesticated in those different parts of the world, and then they're being, in some cases, crossbred with the Brassica Rapa, or they're mixing with wild strains of the Brassica. One of the examples they use in their conclusion is that the vulgaris, the beets, the chard species, was probably mixed in with some version of the Brassica Rapa to create our current version of beets and chards. Now, again, this is just a broad summation of what they have in this document. And they themselves acknowledge in the conclusion that they still need to have a lot of data compiled about additional populations of the various plants from the Caucasus, Siberia, the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, parts of China. There's still more for them to kind of map out. But right now it looks like the Brassica Rapa is the earliest strain of, I guess, the cabbage family to be domesticated, though this is not a singular event. It's several events taking place over several thousand years, and it's also events based on needs of specific parts of the plant that are leading to these various different types of crops emerging, as well as, of course, wild varieties of relatives being introduced to the, I guess, genetic lineage of whatever version of the rapa exists in a particular area. Now, I do want to point out that this is not a new idea that this paper is dealing with. There's actually a very an older theory detailing how these various types of cabbages came into being. This is known as the triangle of Yu. And this was first proposed in the 1930s by Wu Zhang-chun, which I hope I'm not butchering his name, but he was a Korean botanist, although he actually worked in, I think a lot of his career was working in Japan. He grew up, born and raised in like the Japanese Empire, which, as a Korean, not necessarily, or actually not at all, a very good place to grow up as a Korean. However, he did gain, a certain level of fame and acceptance, and he actually has a a Japanese pen name that a lot of his work can be found under, at least his earlier stuff, and that is Nagaharu U, and that is U as in OO, but it is written or is spelled in English with just the letter U, hence the triangle of U. And this is actually a kind of a big deal because he kind of sort of guessed at some stuff that, DNA testing has since proven, at least to an extent. Now, he didn't get it 100% right, but it's still pretty damn impressive, considering he's writing in the 1930s, and DNA is, what, at least 60 years, give or take, from being used. But he kind of guessed that, well, guessed isn't the right word, but he was able to theorize based on, his observances that a lot of the most common species of cabbage, or Brassica, were descended from three, I guess, ancestral strains of plants. And these are the Brassica nigra, which is mustard, the Brassica Rapa, which, as we've discussed, is kind of that turnip ancestor, and the Brassica Oleracea. And these are the more simple versions of these plants. Brassica Rapa, if you remember a Punnett square, their lettering was AA. The Brassica nigra was BB, and the Brassica Oleracea was CC. So these were the diploid version of the plants, and then each of those combined with one of the others to create a tetraploid version, and then various versions of those would intermix with each other. And for those curious, Brassica Rapa again is turnips. Bok choy belongs in that. The Napa cabbage, which is also known as Chinese cabbage, belongs in that. Then you have the Brassica nigra, which again is mustard, specifically black mustard. Then you have the Brassica Oleracea, which is cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. Those all are part of that. And then the tetraploid versions would be a mix between the Rapa and the Nigra. That gives you Brassica juncea, which is the brown mustard. You also have the Brassica napus, which is the combination of the Rapa and the Oleracea, and that was where you get rutabagas, rapeseed, and then you have Brassica carinata, which is like the African mustard or Ethiopian mustard. Also Ethiopian kale. Basically, a lot of the East Africa varieties of cabbage would have been a combination between those two. And of course, there would be other possibilities from different combinations of those, at least according to O's original theory. Now, again, it's not that straightforward. That was just his working theory. But not a bad theory. And again, he's thinking this up before DNA came along. So, he's actually, he got a decent bit right. Now, again, based on his triangle, each of these sides is kind of equal. That's not the case, at least from what current genetic testing tells us. Now, who knows? Once they get more samples of these other types of cabbage, he may end up being more correct than he even is now. So, just wanted to shout him out and, say that, hey, this isn't a new subject. This is something that's been discussed for a while. So, just wanted to go ahead and put that out there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and kind of give some etymology for some of the more, recognizable of these crops. We've already done cabbage specifically, but I do want to do mustard and a couple of others. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into that now, and then we'll move on to the nightshade plants. Of course, as soon as I say that, I remember I did the etymology for cabbage in Latin, Brassica, but I did not do it for English. Cabbage entered into English probably from Old French, specifically North French, where it was something like caboche. which is like head, which is it's kind of like it's a kind of a borrowing from the Latin caput, which meant head, like a head of a cabbage or lettuce. And that, of course, comes from the Proto-Indo-European caput, also meaning head. So, head of lettuce, very old euphemism for a cabbage or something like that. Now, for turnip, I guess the first written record in English that we have for turnip comes from around the 1500s, so this is Middle English. It's a combination of turn, uh, probably in reference to the shape of a turnip. It's like basically something was held in a lathe and spun around, and it would kind of look like it was turned in a lathe. So turn, and nepe. So this is a borrowing from the Latin napus, which was the Latin term for turnip. So it's like turnape, and that's so it's literally a turnip essentially. Now we have mustard. This comes into English from the Old French mostard, or motard, possibly, I think is the modern French for that. But this is basically a combination of most or must, and that is a descent from the Latin mustum, which is new wine, which is also just referred to as must. And the reason mustard is kind of a combination of this is because when these seeds were ground into paste, new wine was added to it to give it that kind of mustard texture. So it's a combination of the seed and this new wine. Though there is some debate that perhaps must came from Old German. It would be like most, but that would be a separate etymology from the mustard of mustard seeds. But I guess the common ancestor between the Old German for new wine must and the Latin mustum would be probably a Pi word meaning musto or meus, which is like damp, or literally wet, or like newborn, essentially. Now, of course, also mold, mustiness also comes from that, but that's again the damp part of must comes from that original definition. I do want to talk about mustard in particular. There are three types of mustard plants. There's white mustard, which is the Sinapis alba, which is technically also the yellow mustard plant. That's where it comes from, and it is in the cabbage family, but is a different genus than the other plants we've been talking about. But it still has a very similar flavor, at least to an extent, as the black and brown mustard plants. And these can grow in a lot of different areas, just naturally. Some of these plants will grow wild. I think as far north. I think the yellow mustard, they've been able to get it to take root in like places like Denmark. Now, the brown mustard is mostly what you'll see in East Asia. This is a lot of like leaf mustards come from this, and that's where you get the Korean red mustards, green mustards, Japanese. There's like a red mustard the Japanese have that's descended from this. The brown mustard you'll find in a lot of the Middle East, temperate parts of Europe, Asia, North Africa, you'll find it, as well as I think parts of India as well. And the same for the white mustard. There's a documented use of some type of mustard seed, either as a condiment or a spice, or in some cases, medicinal curative. And that's very early, not just in the Middle East, but also there is evidence of it being used for that in the Indus Valley area as part of that civilization. So, and that can easily be dated to at least 3000 BC, and that could be even earlier too. There might be evidence that could be as old as 3,500. So again, that's evidence for multiple areas of domestication, even though the white mustard is not quite the same species as, or at least not the same genus as the other cabbages. Now we're moving on to the Solanaceae, or the nightshade plants. And technically, as I said last week, we've already covered one of these plants, and that is the chili peppers. They are technically nightshades and not related to the other varieties of pepper. Now, many of these plants have a lot of alkaloids in them, making them, toxic. Though in some cases, some of those can be offset by how they're prepared. Although again, some you could never eat because of how toxic they are. Although some, specifically eggplants, if you reheat those, depending on how susceptible you are to them, you can get very bad headaches. I had a girlfriend who loved to make eggplant parmesan, and she would sometimes make too much of it, so she would kind of keep it to cook the next day or the day after. And whenever she did so, she would get headaches. Now, she didn't make the connection immediately because it wasn't like an immediate thing. But eventually she found out, oh yeah, you shouldn't reheat eggplants if you're having this reaction consistently. So she stopped doing that. So if you are randomly getting headaches after reheating stuff like that, that might be why. So just keep that in mind. Now, we will go ahead and start. First off, I was back and forth on this about which one to cover first, the tomato or the potato. I'm going to start, I guess, with the potato because there are some people who think it could have been domesticated as early as 8,000 BC. Now, I never quite bought into that. There's no real evidence of that. Now, I'm sure that, wild potato ancestors were being eaten prior to that. But the earliest evidence of domesticated tubers that we find are right around 2,500. And these are in what is now the modern day country of Peru. I believe the site is at Ancon. Now, the etymology for potato comes from Spanish. I think it's batata, which they borrowed directly from the Taino word batata, which means sweet potato. But you'll note that potatoes are not the same as sweet potatoes, but they look similar. So the English are not the first to make that equivalence between potatoes and sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes will have their own section. Probably won't be this week. They are not nightshade plants. Also, for toxicity purposes, or at least to kind of explain toxicity for potatoes, potatoes really don't have too much of that issue unless they're exposed to sunlight. And they start to turn green, then you know that you should not eat that potato. That is a bad thing. But like most tubers, most potatoes are kept in the ground until it's time to harvest them. Now, there are a lot of different varieties of potato. To even in the past. Right now, I think there are 5,000 recognized varieties, and 3,000 of these are just spread throughout like the Andes region alone, and this includes Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador. And there are some valleys where you'll find 100 different varieties, and part of that, the reason why that developed is most likely just due to there were a lot of different wild strains. Also, different cultivars are affected by different diseases. So the more varieties you have, you are less likely to have one single crop destroying blight that basically causes a famine. One of the problems that you see very much later in the Irish potato famine is that they did not have a very wide variety of potato cultivars. So when that blight hit, basically they were all affected by the one disease, and it was a disaster. And in modern, I guess, cultivation, uh, there are areas where different countries grow tubers that are meant to be free from disease and different types of pests. In the U.S., I think only about 12 or 15 states do they allow to grow like seed potatoes that will eventually be sold to the other, the other 50 states. Basically, every state grows some potatoes, but not everywhere is allowed to produce the seed potatoes that will be sent everywhere else. Essentially, they like to grow them where the winters are particularly hard and cold, and where the summers aren't particularly hot, but there's a lot of direct sunlight. So that kind of helps them get optimal growth. So a lot of sunshine, not necessarily a lot of heat during obviously the growing season, and then that cold gestation period with it's getting rid of any kind of pests or disease or anything like that. Now, I'm not sure about other modern countries, like how they do things, but that at least that's the general process of developing the seed potatoes, at least in the modern U.S. Now, one thing about potatoes and tubers in general, I haven't really gone into too much detail. Typically, these are grown more on like a individual or family basis. Most places where these type of crops are available, a lot of state apparatus don't particularly like when people grow these, at least in earlier periods, because you can leave them in the ground, for extended periods. They're harder to tax. So individuals might like to grow these because there's a lot of protein or starch or what have you, and they're hardy crops. They're not easy to kind of keep track of above ground. So a lot of, especially the earlier states in areas, they might allow, families to grow a little bit of these, like kind of on the side. But by and large, they do prefer larger, sturdier grains because those are easy to track and harvest and tax. Now, we are going to move on to our next nightshade, and these are the tomato. Much like potato, this is a very straightforward etymology for English. Our word for tomato comes from the Spanish tomate, which in turn comes from the Nahuatl word tamatal. Now, once again, the date of this is debated. The earliest I've seen is about, there's some that claim it's as early as 5,000 BC. Some will say it's maybe a couple hundred years before that, a couple hundred years later. Again, it's hard to say. Also, there is a debate about where this domestication happens. The plant that modern tomatoes descend from is the Solanum pimpine. I'm going to butcher this. It's a very long one. Pimpineiifolium. And again, that's a butchering. It's also sometimes referred to as a pimp or a currant tomato. And these are, they have a fairly standardized look, red fruit, although if you cut them open, the seeds on these are quite large compared to what you'll find in most groceries or supermarkets today. This type of tomato is still grown. It's still in the wild, and it's used to hybridize. There's a lot of tomato breeders that will crossbreed it with different varieties to kind of give it some of that wild vigor and just keep the plants healthy. And there were a much wider varieties of tomatoes in the past, and we'll get into that here to a second. But again, the exact location of where these were first domesticated is debated. There is thought that they were domesticated where they were originally found. There is some debate that, well, they were partly domesticated in the western portion of South America, and then the semi-domesticated strains would eventually be taken north into Mesoamerica. I'm of the opinion that, yeah, they were probably domesticated initially in South America, and then they spread out from there. And then where you get to Mesoamerica, you begin to see a lot more variety in the types of tomatoes you've seen. And in this case, you've got what we would consider a tomato, fairly small, though in some cases larger red tomatoes. Then you've got some that were grown to be sweet, which isn't something that a lot of people would associate with tomatoes today. They're more associated with that umami flavor. There are some tomatoes where the fruit was fairly small and the leaves were prioritized. Then you had some that were grown kind of like chili peppers. They looked like that. Those were sometimes called serpent tomatoes. Some were grown to be yellow and eaten while yellow. I know for a lot of people who grow red tomatoes, yellow is kind of in that transitional stage. You wouldn't eat a tomato then. And then there were some that maybe had a little bit of piquance. Maybe if they were grown, kind of in tandem with those chili peppers. But most of what we would consider tomatoes today, at least commercially grown, and commercially available, at least here in the U.S., are just your standard red cherry tomatoes. Now, I do want to, in this case, focus on something that happens a little bit later, but it's something I see repeated a lot. So there's this belief that early people living in British North America thought tomatoes were poisonous. That's not really true. There were people who thought that, but it was a very small number. And the first tomatoes found in British North America by William Salmon. I mean, he was able to determine they were edible, and he actually saw those in my home state of South Carolina. They probably came from the Caribbean. Either they were brought by the Spanish, who were eating them and dropped some seeds when they were coming through the area, or something like that, or maybe they were given to some natives that the Spanish were trading with, or who maybe the Taino people were trading with at that point, and then they, those seeds got spread. But people in British North America, they were aware of the tomato before then. I know there's a famous story that Jefferson ate tomatoes in Paris and he sent some seeds back to the Americas, but those are like a different variety of tomato. And they may not have spread very far beyond the Carolinas at that point. But the idea that, Americans thought they were poisonous, very small number of people actually thought that. And they were growing them on small farms well prior to Jefferson taking the variety he got from Paris back to the Americas. Now, the last of the nightshades that we'll be discussing is the eggplant, also known as the aubergine in English, and referred to in other parts of the world as brinjal or baigan. This is the most mysterious of the nightshade plants we'll be talking about this week. This was initially native to Asia, probably somewhere between South Asia or the Indian subcontinent and East Asia or Southeast Asia. And it was domesticated. We do know that there were two separate domestication events, and both of these were domesticated from the wild bitter apple or the thorn apple. And that's the scientific name for that is the Solanum incanum. And I just want to be clear, the Solanum incanum is native to not just Asia, but also Africa as well. I think it's in East Africa. It may have spread to West Africa too. I can't remember that for sure. But the domesticated strains, it emerged in in both South Asia and East Asia in two separate events. And even today, I think like something like 80 or 90% of eggplants are grown in what is now India and China. Now, the origin of the name in English, eggplant is actually comes from the white version of the eggplant. Basically, you can find them in two different shades. There's a white shade and that purple shade. The white shade was more common in Europe, at least initially, and it didn't grow very large. They were literally the size of eggs, initially at least. Though eventually, as Europeans got better at growing at them, they became more closer to the size you would see them today. But basically, they're just like a slightly off-white egg with like a little green cap. And there were other languages that do use that egg term. Welsh, obviously, being very closely related to English, or neighboring English, not necessarily closely related. They have, I think it's Planhigenvi, and then you have Icelandic, where it's Egalden is the Icelandic term. Now, a lot of other European languages derive it from the purple variety. And this name comes from the Arabic Badijan. Now, this comes from Arabic interactions in India, where they probably got the term from one of the Indo-Aryan languages, who themselves got the term from the Dravidian languages. And southern India, where the Dravidian languages are native to, probably is one of the sites where the plant was first domesticated. Now, which Dravidian languages gave it to the Indo-Aryans, or who then gave it to the Arabic speakers, that's all debated. The most common interpretation I've seen is that it came from a Dravidian language, either something like Malayalam or Tamil, and then those got transferred to Sanskrit or Pali, or maybe Prakrit, and then that was eventually adopted into one of the dialects of Persian, and then the Persians into Arabic. That's the most common, simplified way I've seen it explained. Though again, all that's debated. The name in Chinese is Chizi, and interestingly enough, the characters for that, there's two. There's a Jia character, but that just on its own also means eggplant. So I don't know why they have two characters if they just have one that just means eggplant. I don't know if it's like an archaic way, but the other character, Z, in this situation can mean a couple different things, but I think it can mean boy or child. So child plant. I mean, I guess the heads can kind of sometimes maybe look like a kid's head, or like a baby if they're big enough, like you're holding a baby fruit or something. But yeah, I'm not sure why they have two characters together that mean eggplant when they also just have a version of the Jia character that also just means eggplant. Don't know if anyone with any knowledge of Chinese characters has any information on that. Please let me know. Now, I could not get an exact number of cultivars for eggplants, but there's a lot. Not quite as many as potatoes, of course, but depending, I guess, on the origin, there's a few between the Ganges River and the Yamuna River, and there's several, of course, in East Asia as well. Now, the largest ones are typically the variety that were developed along the Ganges and the Yamuna. But then you also have some that are longer and thinner, like cucumbers or Ichiban or Tycoon. Those are the slimmer ones. Most are purple, regardless of where they're grown, though there are some white and even a few different ones with green skin. There's some of those grown in Thailand. And I think they've also successfully brought those over to Louisiana here in the U.S. as well. But regardless, there's a decent number of varieties and different cultivars for the eggplant. Now, in terms of timing, again, hard to say. Could be as early as 6,000, so actually last season. But most of the literature I've read tends to put it at a slightly later date, right around 2000 BC, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, but that's what we've got. Now, eventually, I'm sure they'll get to studying that, but hard to say for sure right now. Where are we at time? Oh wow, we're already at 45 minutes. I was not expecting this episode to take quite this long, but I guess this is a good place to call it. We've still got, I think, another episode of plant domestication to go. Don't have too much in way of animal domestication this season, but there might be one or two things to go over. I'll need to double check my notes. And then we're going to do, I guess, our metallurgical episodes for this season. And then after that, I think it's time to get into studying specific places and peoples. But I do want to thank everyone who's joined me this week. Appreciate you all. Again, please be sure to like, download, rate 5 stars, all that kind of good stuff. Subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, constructive criticism, please let me know. You can reach me at war@revpod@gmail.com. You can also comment on any of the YouTube videos, as well as send me a direct message on X/Twitter. But until next time, I hope you all have a good one, a good week, and rest of your day from whenever you're listening to this. Before I forget, this is the 28th. So actually next Monday is the July 6th? Yeah, July 6th, because July 4th I think is on a Saturday this week. So I will not be in town. I'll be out of town for the 4th. So no episode next Monday. There will be one the following week, though. Just wanted to go ahead and let you guys know that. Sorry I've taken a little bit more time off than I normally do, but again, family emergencies. But I definitely am going to be too busy celebrating the 4th to get you guys out a proper episode next week. So 1 week off, but until then, I hope you all have a good one, and we'll see everyone next time. Peace.